my dears, I would say that today begins a new discussion on my channel about disability in the arts, but I'm also pretty sure that that is a straight up lie, because we've definitely talked about those things before, because I always talk about those things. But today is the time that I do it very, very deliberately, because this is now intertwined with my independent study, which I have theoretically told you about at this point, and you can learn about in the card above, or maybe not, because I am holding that video until I get the final couple things figured out for that study, and while it is scheduled to come out like 2 weeks or a week before this one, that may not happen. We'll see. But anyway, that was a bit of a ramble. Hi, my name is Sydney. I use they, them pronouns. Sometimes I dress like a vintage Disney princess or whatever is happening right now, and sometimes I dress like if Gilbert Blythe from Anne of Green Gables was the same personality and vibes, but like in the 1940s and 50s. Yeah, I am a multiply disabled, autistic, trans, queer actor, and I study psychology and theater and really anything else that I find interesting. Absolutely nobody can stop me, no matter how hard they have tried. An audio description for friends who need it: I am a white person in their early 20s with brownish blondish curly hair that's about shoulder length. I'm currently wearing a white peasant top dress, and I'm sitting in front of a bookshelf with books on it and some photos behind me on the wall. And today we're going to talk about the disability arts ghetto, which my textbook convinced me was a thing. It talked a lot about this thing. I wrote down a lot of notes about this thing with the intention of making a video about said thing, and then when I googled disability arts ghetto, I found one single cool reading about disability itself as a ghetto that sort of alluded to the disability arts ghetto, but nothing on the disability arts ghetto specifically. So now I'm gaslighting myself into thinking that maybe I made all of this up, but I swear that I haven't. And if for some reason I have, the concept makes a lot of sense anyway, so therefore it's fine. What is the disability arts ghetto? The word ghetto has two definitions. The first is the noun, ghetto, being a part of a city, especially a slum area occupied by a minority group or groups. And then we have the verb, which is to put in or restrict to an isolated or segregated area or group. And frankly, I think the use of the word ghetto in the sense of disability arts is both a noun, as in like, the arts for you are over there, and the sense of a purposeful ghettoing of disability arts. Basically, it refers to the fact that the arts, anything made by, for, and with openly disabled people, is sectioned off from the general public. It's kind of its own little arts world. And today we are going to talk about the positives and the negatives, and the question of how can they coexist, and how can we make sure that people get the option to go in and out of the disability arts ghetto. So first of all, we have the positives. The thing about disability art spaces is that, well, we get our own space. The disability community is one of very few minorities, similar to the queer community, where it's not a cultural thing that comes down in generations in the same way that your race and ethnicity typically are, in the majority of cases, shared with your family. For disabled and queer people, it is significantly more likely that you are going to be the only one of your identity in your entire family. And so that puts our communities at a disadvantage of sorts, because we have to seek out and find each other. So having places and spaces that are designated for us to find that community and make art and feel less alone are so important for building self-worth and confidence and supporting each other and making our struggles less of struggles. Disability arts are our form of minority and cultural experience. And by creating that affinity space to realize that we're not alone, it builds the feeling of, oh, I do matter and I am actually good at this, which makes people more likely to go out into the world of mainstream theater and not quit when they are treated like absolute poo the entire time. Kind of in the same way that, like, I went to a girls' high school for high school, and now when I do things in co-ed environments and people try to be sexist or shut me up because they perceive me to be a woman, I know that I'm worth more and I try to take up more space. Disability art spaces also give us the ability to make arts that reflect our community and the needs of our community, and then bring that out to wider audiences in order to raise awareness about the issues of disability and lack of inclusion, and just kind of like build a general understanding of like, hi, we exist, we're really nice, we're really cool. For example, National Disability Theater did a tour a couple years ago, and a solid half of the venues, a lot of them were schools that they went to, didn't have accessible stages to get onto. So they performed directly in front of the stages and explained to the audience why they had to do that. And it made a lot of the places remodel to make their stages accessible after that embarrassment. Also, a lot of disability art is made to flip the script and make an abled audience, one that is used to expecting the disabled people to be passive and submissive, become the passive and submissive ones themselves that are forced to listen to us. And a lot of disability arts makes use of that in order to make the audience sit and reflect on their own internalized discrimination and uncomfortability, which is Very, very important. And there's also something to be said about the power of having an audience that is entirely in tune with disability, culture, and norms, because you don't have to worry as much about making sure that the abled audience is educated on the, bases of disability community that they need in order to properly understand the art or the point that you want to make or whatever. You can just kind of create for the sake of creating and know that everybody else will just get it. It kind of takes off an added layer of pressure and leaves room for more natural creation. However, as beautiful as the disability arts ghetto is, the fact that it's not an affinity sector that we've created for ourselves and rather a ghetto is an issue. First of all, being separated can cause a sort of an echo chamber. Arts have more power than people think, and on one level, disabled people finding community in other disabled people through art is super, super important because that empowers them to fight harder for equality, but then at the same time, there comes a point where everyone in the room wants the same things and is trying to prove the exact same point, and the wider audience who really needs to hear that point doesn't even know that disability art exists. And a quote that I really liked from the awesome essay I found, which I will link in the description for you, it's only 6 pages long and I highly recommend reading it, said, "I do not produce work in spite of my disability, but because of it. To those of us inside the ghetto, this statement is self-evident to the point of banality, but to people outside the ghetto, including numerous other artists with disability, it is still challenging enough that I think it's worth repeating." It's also very common for able-bodied, or normit as we call them, people to think that once they've seen or read or attended one kind of disability art, they know all of there is to know about disability and disability arts, which is obviously not the case. Because first of all, if you've read Temple Grandin's book or seen the movie, you don't know a single thing about the autism community at all whatsoever. But also there are so many different kinds of disability and therefore disability experiences that cannot all be covered by a single piece of work. And also, in general, disability art is typically taken less seriously than your traditional mainstream art. Disabled people aren't praised for the quality of their art, but instead by how inspirational it is that they're able to make art at all. It's so powerful. And it's also expected that arts by, with, and for disabled people are not made for the sake of making art, but rather they're framed in terms of therapeutic goals. And to be fair, when we see disabled arts in the mainstream, that's usually the case. Arts are used in that sense as a way to help disabled people, often just as a way to keep them in group homes busy, and because of that, the art that's produced is often very impairment-oriented and incomplete. It's framed as if it's accepting the social model of disability, when really it's the medical model hiding behind the guise of art to make it friendly. That's important, but it's not disability arts. And both disabled and non-disabled people know that, but because the audience of therapeutic arts is inevitably larger than of disability arts, normally people think that disability arts is only the therapeutic arts. I'm so sad about being disabled, it's so hard to be me, and they don't understand the beauty of our artistic endeavors outside of what is dictated by the able-bodied people who are helping us out. There also is this paradigm that I've completely forgotten the name of, and I cannot find it again, which is really frustrating, but it's where the more famous a disabled person's art becomes, the more that their disability narrative is inevitably separated from their art, as if their disability does not directly intertwine with how, why, and what they create, which is really, really infuriating, but also that checks out because that's what happened. We've seen it with Beethoven and Van Gogh and Frida Kahlo and many others. But my biggest struggle with the ghettoization of, that's a word, yeah, of disability arts, specifically in the sense of theater, is that I've had professors who have seen me having a hard time in the classroom and therefore told me the theater isn't made for people like me, that's why we have our own special theaters and maybe I should try to go to those instead. And that's for me definitely the biggest issue, because people who don't want to integrate mainstream arts are going to say that there's no need because we have our own spaces, so we can just go there instead, which makes life easier for everybody involved. And hopefully I don't need to explain to you why segregation is bad. Hopefully you know that at this point, but it lets people just push natural parts of society that they don't like under the rug and pretend that they don't exist, which therefore is going to cause more discrimination and stereotyping over time. And also, obviously, separate but equal does not mean equal, because it's not. So, yeah. But where do we go from here? Obviously, the first solution is to integrate mainstream theaters and other art spaces. Yes, there is the occasional person in a wheelchair in various shows, and that's super, super great and super, super important. But also, we deserve way more than that. Like, way more than that. The arts are where we go to explore what it means to be human in all of its messiness and diversity, and we can't just pretend that a massive piece of it 20% of the population doesn't exist because that kind of defeats the whole purpose of arts. Also, disability is very much present in all art, but it's portrayed by non-disabled people and it's a flawed disaster and that's not helping anybody. But that is a story for another day. And it's also important to note that there is a distinct difference between inclusion and integration. Inclusion is saying that you will welcome people of all abilities, of all races, of all sexualities into your space, and just leaving it at that, which is great. That is super, super important. But what we need is integration, which is where people evaluate the systems, realize that minority people who are welcomed in by your work on inclusion are still treated as lesser than, are still discriminated against in small ways, and we should try to figure out how to make things equally accessible for all people. But integration means change, and that scares people, so instead we just slap on a "we welcome people of all identities" thing onto stuff, and then we do absolutely zero other work to try to make the space friendly to people of all identities. And that, my friends, is a very brief description of the field of performing arts education. It's terrible. It has made me so sick twice over that I almost died both times, but yet I'm still kicking and still trying to do this career for some reason. And no, I don't know what's wrong with me either, but at this point I feel kind of unkillable, so I'm gonna just keep using my immortality to politely yell at people to fix themselves and their systems. I've been told that I should become a disability consultant for theaters, particularly their education programs, and like how to make them accessible, and that. I think that'd be a really great side job, so if anybody needs anyone, I'm around. But anyway, in regards to reforming theater education and how we can run theaters in an accessible manner, watch this space. You're welcome to subscribe if you so desire, but I have some things coming up fairly soon about that exact thing, more in the fall semester. And in regards to everything else, I think it's super awesome that we have our own affinity disabled art spaces. I don't think it's awesome that I didn't know that they existed until I very deliberately decided to do research on them and that I had to go through like 3 pages of Google to find them, but most of these things are fairly recent and just starting to trickle into the mainstream knowledge, so I do have hope for that. I think that's going in great directions, but I also think that as important as it is to have our own spaces, and we should definitely keep them around, those should not be our only options for work in the professional arts. We should be able to work in the mainstream and be educated in the mainstream and be seen and treated as equal people. I shouldn't have to be afraid of working in National Disability Theatre because I know that that's going to cement the idea that I should be there and rather not working in the mainstream. I want to be able to create art wherever I want to be able to create art, and that shouldn't be a radical idea, and yet somehow it is. So, as always, thank you for listening, thank you for learning. Remember, it's never too late to start over, and I look forward to seeing you, my dear, in the next one.